Hello, dear listeners. I'm your host, Genevieve Hopkins, and welcome to episode 37 of the Wheel and Cross podcast. Finally, it feels like the season has turned. The autumnal weather now matches the fiery blush of leaves that have been changing their hue despite the unseasonal heat of the last few weeks. This month sees the downward slide into the darker half of the year, and the final seasonal celebration of the year, according to many ancient Celtic communities, the celebration of Samhain, which evolved into the modern-day Halloween. There are many interesting facets to Samhain, and so much information to share that I need to split it into 4 parts. In this first part, we'll explore the origins of Samhain, its evolution into Halloween, and some of the traditions connected to this time of year, including bonfires, divination, and ancestor veneration. We'll also discover similar celebrations from around Europe, such as the Spanish and Latin American Dia de los Muertos, the Finnish Kekri, Nordic and Germanic Vetrnætr, which includes dísablót and álfablót, and the Slavic Dziady. This podcast is free, but if you like my work, please consider subscribing to the Wheel and Cross Substack page, www.wheelandcross.substack.com. I would also appreciate your reviews on any of the podcasting platforms you use. Feel free to share this podcast and leave comments on the podcast page. Welcome to episode 37 of the Wheel and Cross podcast. Samhain Part 1, Bonfires, Divination, and Ancestor Veneration. As always, I would like to acknowledge the custodians of these lands on which I work and live in Australia's capital region, the lands of the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people, and I pay my deep respects to their elders past and present, and to all First Nations and First People across Australia. Samhain is a Gaelic word that translates to summer's end, and refers to the ancient Celtic festival marking the end of the harvest season and the beginning of winter. The Manx called Samhain Hune or Hoptune. Hoptune is the oldest continuously existing tradition on the Isle of Man, and its name comes from Manx Gaelic songs that were traditionally sung during the festival and included the nonsense phrase Hoptune as a refrain. This Hoptune song is from the village of Ramsey on the Isle of Man. Hoptune, Hoptune, Ginny the witch, she ate the horse, she ate the mane and the tail, of course. Hoptune, Hoptune. Ginny the witch, she ate the cow, but how she ate it I don't know how. Hoptune, Hoptune. Ginny the witch, she ate the sheep, she left the wool all in a heap. Hoptune, Hoptune. Ginny the witch, she ate the hog, she ate the cat and she ate the dog. Hoptune, Hoptune. Ginny the witch went into the house, she ate the ringy, she ate the mouse. Hoptune, Hoptune. Ginny the witch, she'll soon be in view, and if you're not careful, she'll eat you too. Hoptune, Hoptune. Ginny the witch, she's in your house. Give us a penny and we'll chase her out. Hoptune, Hoptune. If you're going to give us it soon, for we want to be home by the light of the moon. Hoptune, Hoptune. Samhain was a significant event in Celtic culture, celebrated with various rituals and traditions to honour the dead, acknowledge the changing seasons, and prepare for the dark and coldest months ahead. The Celts revered this time as a liminal period when the boundary between the physical and spiritual realms was at its thinnest. As the leaves turned golden and the days grew shorter, people gathered around bonfires to celebrate the bountiful harvest, make divinations, protect against malevolent spirits, and honour their ancestors. With the spread of Christianity, pagan practices were shunned or Christianized. In 731 AD, Pope Gregory III designated November the 1st as All Saints' Day or All Hallows' Day, to honour Christian saints and martyrs, with the preceding night becoming All Hallows' Eve or Halloween. November the 2nd was dedicated as All Souls' Day, to incorporate the widespread practice of ancestor worship by integrating the idea of comforting souls in purgatory. The 3 days, including All Saints' Eve or Halloween, All Saints' Day and All Souls' Day, were called All Hallowtide. Samhain is mentioned in historical records primarily through Irish mythology and medieval texts. The earliest references to Samhain are found in Irish sagas such as the Labor Gabála Éireann, or Book of Invasions, and the Cath Maig Tuired, the Second Battle of Maig Tuired, which date back to the early medieval period. These texts depict Samhain as a significant festival marking the end of the harvest season and the beginning of winter. Additionally, medieval Irish texts like the Sanus Cormac, or Cormac's Glossary, provide insights to the customs and rituals associated with Samhain, highlighting its importance in Celtic society. Irish immigrants brought their Samhain or Halloween traditions to America and then re-exported the modern Halloween traditions around the world. Other European cultures also celebrated traditions similar to Samhain, and these will be explored later in this episode. There is evidence throughout the Celtic world that bonfires were lit on Samhain Eve in celebrations mirroring the Beltane fires of spring. These fires were traditionally need fires, also called forced fires or living fires, meaning they were newly made by using friction forces. More information about need or living fires can be found in episode 21, Beltane, Lighting the Balefires. Fires, especially need fires lit on Beltane and Samhain, were believed to have protective and cleansing powers to drive away malevolent spirits and offer warmth and light during the darkening days of autumn. People would extinguish their hearth fires and relight them from the sacred bonfires to renew communal bonds and venerate the spirits that protected their families. In some places, livestock would be driven between two bonfires to purify and protect them against disease before being brought back to their winter shelters. The bonfires also served as focal points for communal gatherings, where people would feast, dance, and participate in divination rituals to honour their ancestors and seek blessings for the coming year. At this time of year, the thinning of the veil between this world and the other world, or Tír na nÓg in Irish, meant that Samhain was considered a fortuitous time for divination. Divination, using stones laid around a fire, was commonly performed in Scotland, Wales, and Brittany, where each stone represented a member of the family or group. After dancing around the fire and performing long-forgotten rituals, the stones would be left overnight. In the morning, if they had been moved from their original position, the stone's bearer was predicted to have a year of ill fortune. If they were mislaid, they predicted death. Apples were strongly associated with the otherworld in Celtic mythology and were often used in divination related to relationships and marriage. One method of divination that is still well known and commonly practiced involves peeling apples in one long strip and throwing the apple peel over the shoulder. The shape it forms, once it falls, is said to be the first letter of the future spouse's name. Another method of divination involved roasting 2 hazelnuts near a fire. One hazelnut would be named for the person roasting it, and the other for the person they desired. It was considered a bad sign if the nuts jumped away from the heat, but an excellent match was foretold if the nuts roasted quietly. The shape of egg whites dropped in water could be used to foretell the number of future children. Birds in flight, their number, direction and behaviour could also augur different fortunes. Young people would chase crows at Samhain to divine their future for the year. Another commonly used method of divination involved the baking of special cates, or bannocks, called barmbrack. Barmbrack, from the Gaelic berin, meaning loaf, and briac, meaning speckled, is an Irish fruit bread traditionally baked for Halloween, similar to the Welsh Bada Brith. In many recipes, the dried fruit was soaked overnight in cold tea or whiskey. It was often baked with trinkets or charms to foretell the future for the next year. A pea meant no marriage. A stick meant relationship disputes. A piece of cloth meant bad luck. A bean meant poverty. A coin meant riches and good fortune, and a ring meant marriage. In the spirit of the season, I created a barmbrack scone recipe as an easy, fun and tasty way to ensure good fortune for Samhain and the Celtic New Year. It can be found in the accompanying article for this episode and contains ingredients that are imbued with positive sentiments for the new year. Pumpkin for abundance, dried apples for health, red currants or cranberries for love, crystallized ginger for passion, hazelnuts for wisdom, pecans for wealth, spices for fulfillment, and sugar for joy. If you wish, mark it with a cross to represent the tradition of soul cakes, which we'll explore further in this episode. Central to Samhain and Halloween is the practice of ancestral veneration, which not only includes the veneration of ancestors in direct lineage, but also the first ancestors, the gods. In Ireland, these gods were often conceived as members of the Tuatha De Danann, or the Firbolg, who disappeared from the land into the otherworld through barrows, or burial mounds, scattered all over Celtic lands. The Irish call them the Airshí, and they are called the Doingeshi in Scottish Gaelic, meaning people of the mounds. To avoid the attention of these notoriously mercurial, capricious and sometimes malevolent beings, people called or described them by different names, such as fairies, the fae or fair folk, or the good people. The Celts believed that during Samhain, the spirits of the dead, ancestors and the fair folk returned to visit the living. To honour, appease and request guidance from the dead, people would hold tribal or clan feasts, and a place was set at the feasting tables, with offerings of food and drink for the souls who had passed into the other world. This custom was known as the Flead na Merb, or the Feast of the Dead, and was often held over 3 days. Kevin Danaher says in his 1972 book, The Year in Ireland, "It is not uncommon on Samhain night to see the returned dead of the family seated around the kitchen hearth. Household lights were often extinguished at dusk during the Samhain festival to avoid confusing the travelling spirits. Other household and region-specific traditions to welcome the dead were practiced, such as this one from County Tyrone, described by Rose Shaw in her 1931 book, Carlton's Country. All Souls' Eve is sacred to the memory of the departed. After the floor has been swept and a good fire put down on the earth, the family retires early, leaving the door unlatched and a bowl of spring water on the table, so that any relative who has died may find a place prepared for him at his own fireside. As previously mentioned, the Christian Church transformed this ancient veneration of ancestors into the celebration of All Souls' Day, observed on November the 2nd. In many places across Europe, the day begins with the tolling of church bells, inviting people to pray for the souls of the departed. Christians may attend special masses or services dedicated to praying for the souls of the departed. They may also offer prayers at home or at the graveside. Visiting the gravesides of deceased loved ones is common practice and frequently involves cleaning graves and decorating them with flowers, candles, and offerings. Lighting candles in the home, church, or at the gravesite symbolises prayers for the soul of the departed and serves as a way to remember and honour them. In some communities, processions are held to honour the dead, like the loud and colourful Spanish and Latin American festival Dia de los Muertos, which you can explore in episode 24, Dia de los Muertos, Day of the Dead. Sharing a meal with family and friends in remembrance of the departed is also a common practice for All Souls' Day. It frequently includes setting a place at the table for the departed and serving food and drink so the departed souls can enjoy a meal with their loved ones. Sometimes a candle is placed in an empty table setting and lit to remember and honour the departed. This is a common practice for military units in many European countries. Some traditions, called the dumb supper, also involve eating the meal in complete silence. Offerings of food were an important part of ancestral veneration, and in the British Isles, this evolved into the practice of baking and offering soul cakes. Soul cakes are small, round cakes, typically spiced with ingredients such as cinnamon, nutmeg, and ginger, and sometimes marked with a cross on top to symbolise the soul's passage from purgatory to heaven. The earliest reference to soul cakes comes from the medieval times. They were seen as a gesture of charity and a way for the living to remember and assist the souls of the departed. Poor individuals, often children and beggars, would go door to door on All Souls' Day, singing or reciting prayers in exchange for soul cakes. This custom evolved into what we now recognise as trick-or-treating, which we'll explore next week in the second part of this series on Samhain. Those going a-souling often sang little songs or ditties that differed according to their location. From Wales, West Midlands and Hertfordshire. Soul, soul for a soul cake, I pray good missus a soul cake, an apple or pear, a plum or a cherry, any good thing to make us merry. 1 for Peter, 2 for Paul, 3 for him who made us all. Up with the kettle and down with the pan, give us good alms and we'll be gone. From Staffordshire. Soul, soul for an apple or two. If you've got no apples, pears will do. If you've got no pears, halfpennies will do. If you got no halfpennies, God bless you. And from Somerset. A soul for a soul cake. 1 for Jack Smith and 1 for Tom White, and 1 for myself, and I'll bid you good night. My clothes are very ragged, my shoes are very thin. I've got a little pocket to put 3 halfpence in, and I'll never come a-souling till another year. Other countries across Europe celebrate similar traditions at this liminal time of year. Kekri is a traditional harvest festival celebrated in Finland, marking the conclusion of the agricultural year and the onset of the dark winter season. It typically occurred around late October or early November. During this time, people gathered to express gratitude for the harvest with lavish feasting, drinking and dancing. Overindulgence was important during Kekri, as it was considered a bad omen for the following harvest if someone went hungry. The amount of meat eaten represented how fat the cattle would grow in the next year, while the amount of beer consumed helped to make the barley grow. Customs to honour ancestors were also important during this time. On the evening before the feast day, the head of the household would perform a ritual to invite the spirits of their deceased relatives to join the feast. This involved pouring a trail of ale from the road to the farmstead and around the house, blessing the homestead and family with good fortune for the coming year. The family sauna was cleaned and heated for use by the ancestor spirits, and a votive table with offerings of meat and drink was placed beside the sauna. A place was also laid for the ancestors at the feasting table. Similarly to Samhain, it was believed that the veil between worlds was thin at this time of year. It was called Jakwaika, the divining time, when people believed they lived between the past and the future year. Malevolent spirits roamed the lands and needed to be kept at bay with bonfires, and people wore costumes to confuse them. Men dressed as kekripukki, adorned with goat-horned masks and fur coats worn inside out and upside down. Women dressed as kekritari, clothed in white from top to bottom, their faces covered with white gauze or paint. The kekripukki and kekritari then roamed from house to house, requesting beer and food, similar to the souling or guising of Samhain and Halloween trick-or-treating. If they were turned away, they would threaten to break something, usually the household oven. Kekri was also an important time for divination, to foretell future partners and conduct love spells. A common method for divining the future included interpreting the shapes made by molten tin poured into cold water. Modern Kekri celebrations have evolved from familial celebrations to municipal or organisational holidays. Celebrations now typically involve citywide feasts, dances, musical performances, street markets, etc. Some places, such as the city of Kajani, burnt a giant goat made of straw called kekripukki. Although modern Halloween traditions from the United States have begun to penetrate Finnish Kekri traditions, there is a growing interest in folk culture and a resurgence in household Kekri celebrations. The first 3 days of the winter season in Old Nordic and Germanic regions were called winter nights or Vetrnætr in Old Icelandic, which began 28 days after the autumn equinox, around the end of October and the beginning of November. In the pre-Christian Norse calendar, this time was marked with an important festival known as dísablót or dísablót. In Norse mythology and Germanic folklore, the dísir, or the singular dís, were female supernatural beings associated with fate, ancestry, and protective spirits. They were often regarded as guardian spirits of particular families or lineages. During dísablót, offerings and sacrifices were made to the dísir, often at sacred sites or mounds associated with ancestral burial grounds. These offerings could include food, drink, and other symbolic items to seek the favour and protection of the dísir for the well-being and prosperity of the clan and its future generations. The dísir were believed to influence the shaping of people's destinies and had the power to both bless and curse. Winter nights also involved a more private custom, which occurred in homesteads and was only attended by close kin. This tradition was called álfablót, meaning elven sacrifice. Not much is known about what transpired during álfablót, as strangers were not welcomed on homesteads during the celebration and were turned away, in stark contrast to the usual Nordic hospitality. It is known that the celebrations were administered and rituals conducted by women. The Norse believed that alfar, or elves, are nature spirits and guardians, often depicted as ethereal beings associated with the natural landscapes such as forests, rivers, and mountains. Similarly to the Celtic good people, or fairies, they live in or are connected to grave mounds and are believed to possess great wisdom and magical powers, influencing the fertility of the land and the prosperity of communities. Though they can be benevolent and protective, they are also known to be unpredictable and sometimes capricious, requiring offerings and rituals to maintain their favour. Dziady is a traditional Slavic festival observed primarily in Poland, Belarus, Russia, and Ukraine. The word Dziady translates to forefathers or ancestors in English, reflecting the festival's focus on honouring the deceased and maintaining a connection with familial lineages. Dziady is typically held at the end of autumn, although it is sometimes celebrated again in spring. It is a time when families come together to pay homage to their ancestors' memory and offer prayers for their souls. During Dziady, various rituals are performed to commemorate the departed. Families visit cemeteries to tend to grave sites, cleaning and decorating them with flowers and candles. Lighting candles at the graves is a common practice, symbolising remembrance and spiritual guidance for the souls of the deceased. Additionally, offerings such as food, drink, or symbolic items may be left at the grave sites as a sign of respect and to ensure the well-being of the ancestors' spirits. Some areas also prepare saunas for their ancestors to bathe. Sometimes fires were kindled at crossroads to prevent demons or the souls of people who died suddenly from suicide, drowning, or violence from being born. In some parts of Poland, whenever a person passed a place where someone died through violence, they were obliged to throw a sprig at the stake erected on the site, which was then burned every year at Dziady. Wandering beggars were also called Dziady and viewed as meditators between this world and the other world. People offered food or coins and requested the beggar Dziady to pray for the souls of their departed loved ones. Providing food to beggars was an important part of soul rituals and was a form of feeding the ancestors. The Catholic and Orthodox churches have either tried to ban or marginalise these practices, or they have been syncretised with Christian celebrations. However, it is still a common custom in Poland, Belarus, and parts of Russia to carry a symbolic meal in clay pots to the graves of the dead. I hope you enjoyed this deep dive into the history of Samhain or Halloween and its customs such as bonfires, divination, and ancestor veneration. There are many ways to celebrate Samhain. Why not try making your own soul cakes or barmbrack? Maybe use the recipe in this episode. Light a candle for your ancestors, set a place at the table and invite them to join your Samhain feast. Try your hand at some type of divination or tell spooky stories. Next week, we'll explore the fun of trick-or-treating, the art of the scare, and Samhain or Halloween games. In the meantime, I give you a traditional Celtic Samhain blessing, edited to be more agnostic. At All Hallows Tide may you be kept safe from goblin and pooker and black-hearted stranger, from harm of the water and hurt of the fire, from thorns of the bramble, from all other danger, from will-o'-the-wisp haunting the mire, from stumbles and tumbles and tricksters to vex you. May the ancestor spirits this day protect you. See you next week for episode 38. Samhain Part 2. Trick-or-treating, scares and games.